Give
It has started.
a bio info. Okay, so just to provide you all with a little bit of context, so Mary Beth Thompson is here applying for our sexual health coordinator position, and we sent a prompt. So I just wanted to read the generalized prompt that you had, so people know. So we asked Mary Beth to choose a sexual health topic and address the following components. Factors that impact sexual health, Mary Beth's foundational approach to this work, and how that approach will improve the sexual health or wellness of OSU students. So kind of that broad context, and I'll let you jump in. So we have about 30 minutes for a presentation, about 15 minutes for Q&A.
So as she said, my name is Mary Beth Thompson. I have my master's in public health and I'm CHEST certified. And today we're going to be talking about LGBTQ plus inclusivity in sex ed. Sorry, I have notes that I forgot to pull out. So why do we need it? Why can't we just have regular old comprehensive sex ed? So according to data from Healthy People 2020, gay men and gay or lesbian women show decreased condom use, that's an increased STI risk, as well as gay men and trans women are at an increased risk for HIV. From the CDC, and this is from the Youth Behavioral Risk Factors Surveillance, Youth BRFIS. So between 2006 and 2010, and then again in 2011 to 2013, there were significant declines in overall adolescent assigned female at birth reports of having received formal education about birth control, STDs, HIV, and AIDS, as well as teaching them how to communicate around if they wanted to have sex or not. This same report also noted that assigned males at birth received a decrease in that education as well, specifically in regards to birth control. And most assigned male at birth folks are never taught that they need to say no to sex or anything like that, so that's kind of troubling. So we also know that 83% of primary and secondary syphilis cases are accounted for by men who have sex with men where partners assigned sex at birth was known in the U.S. And when they say MSM, they mean people whose current gender marker is male. So that can include trans women as well. And that less than 6% of LGBT students between 13 and 21 received positive messaging in their sexual health classes, or in health classes at all, about LGBT-related topics. So the following organizations have all called for LGBT inclusive sex ed because we know that representation in all forms matters, and that includes in our health classes, specifically in our sexual health classes as well. So I'm going to prompt the audience for some interaction because I don't want to just lecture at y'all. What do y'all think an LGBT inclusive sex ed would look like?
Anything like a class or a workshop or?
Any of that.
I think some kind of interaction, conversation that's open about sex. All type of sex.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So like all types of sex that you can have. I think that's a start.
I think it's a great start. Any other thoughts?
Representative of your student population and student voice.
Yeah, I guess tying on that, I was thinking like representative of LGBTQ voice, and so whether that was facilitators, whether that was being mindful of who participated in the creation of that education.
To talk about the different types of sex partners that's in that, the LGBTQ, kind of like, trans or questioning or curious or parts of sex.
I was going to say pretty much that, but just point out that at any time in any classroom, any student of any age could be anywhere on the spectrum, may not know on the spectrum where they are, and so everyone ought to receive sex ed relative to all possible partners.
I think another good place to start perhaps is to have the program with leaders, facilitators, collaborators who are educated on the topic. If you don't have that, you can't advance, programs that are accurate.
I think sometimes in these conversations, what I tend to notice is that we tend to forget about folks who are asexual and about how that is absolutely a form of sexual health and well-being, so elevating that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So y'all hit a lot of the points. One of the other parts is person-first language. So instead of saying women, when we mean people with vaginas, we say people with vaginas. And that way we're talking about specific parts and their specific needs as opposed to gendering those parts. We know that a lot of trans folks don't have a surgery to change their parts because it's dangerous and expensive and maybe they don't want it. And so person-first language can help people talk about symptoms, talk about the parts that we're talking about without gendering them. And we found that that's very effective, and there's actually been some recent research that came out about that being an effective form of communication. I've used it with middle schoolers because people say, oh, it's clunky to say person with a prostate or person who menstruates. And it can be, and no one will understand me, but middle schoolers were able to understand me when I use that language. So I'm going to hope that other folks can too. And if not, we'll adjust. Relationship and gender inclusive or expansive, so talking about partners, some people call them lovers. I would actually encourage people not to use significant other because that can be sort of implying that everyone's monogamous. And while ethically non-monogamous folks aren't necessarily part of the LGBT community, LGBT folks can be non-monogamous. So those are different kind of language shifts. Changing from gendered condoms of male and female condoms to internal insertive or external roll-on, talking about what the condom physically is doing. Including gloves, dental dams, and capes in our conversations. Does anyone here know what a cape is in reference to sexual health? No, I wish I brought my glove. So a cape is something used traditionally by trans men who've taken testosterone, and after testosterone has been taken for about 2 years, the clitoris will expand. So if you pretend that my thumb is the clitoris that's been expanded and my hand is the vagina, you take the glove, you cut off the fingers, you cut it in half, and you're able to place it over the vulva and the what's called a T-penis a lot of times. So that allows for protective oral sex for that person, whereas a dental dam would not be comfortable for them. So including those conversations with gloves, a lot of people don't know that those little hangnails you get can also cause micro tears in your partners. And so talking about using gloves to protect your partners in all ways. So adding language about who is giving and receiving, so talking about the giving partner, the receiving partner, simple stuff. Consent conversations that include the names of parts, hormone use, pronouns, and who to use them with. So that even expands beyond just physical acts of sex. Like if your partner's non-binary, they may not want you to use their pronouns that they prefer with their parents because they may not be out yet, or with this certain group. Talking about what they want to call their parts, so that you're not using vagina when that feels uncomfortable for them. Talking about hormones, because a lot of people think once someone starts hormones, they're not able to cause or become pregnant, but they are. So talking about what your hormone use is. If someone's taking testosterone who has a vagina, they may experience vaginal dryness, which can lead to micro tears, which is an increased STI risk. So talking about those things, and we barely have basic consent conversations, so we need to have the basic ones and then expand upon it. And then when discussing medical care, describing symptoms by the part affected, not by the assumed gender. So persons with prostates need prostate exams. And then talking about toys and how people use them because they can transmit STIs. So talking about how to protect toys and how to clean toys and what toys are safe or not safe to be using. Since they are an unregulated industry in the US, there's some real scary stuff that can go into them and can impact folks in their health. All right. And then, y'all mentioned this one a lot, adding discussion of LGBTQ identities. My example was going to be asexuality, so thank you for stealing my example. No, I'm kidding. So a lot of folks feel uncomfortable, especially if they're asexual, with this sexual health conversation, because they're like, this doesn't apply to me, for different reasons. So including that identities are not necessarily fluid, but that your sexuality is fluid, and that looks different for a lot of people. It can mean you like blondes in your teens and you're into redheads by your 30s. It can mean you're attracted to different genders or you don't experience sexual desire at all. So at the end of the day, cisgender heterosexual people will also benefit from LGBT inclusive sex because there's no sex acts that are purely like LGBT sex acts. So that's that point. So let's talk about determinants of health and how they impact sexual health. So the first is biology and genetics. So this includes things like age. 15 to 24-year-olds are the highest risk group for STIs. They account for nearly half of new STI cases. And that's according to the CDC. Genetics, so that includes anatomy as well. So people who are born with vaginas, unless they have a surgery to remove their vagina, they're at a greater risk for STIs because they have more mucous membranes. They have, the whole vaginal canals and mucous membranes is very prone to tears and STI infections. Folks who are born HIV positive are at risk for different types of infections and diseases throughout their life as well. So, and all of these tie together, which is why they're all overlapping. Policy, that's sex education, that's contraceptive education, access to contraception, access to abortion, access to adoption, and the legality of sex acts. In some states, it's on the books as being illegal to perform certain acts, so that it can impact folks and how they are treated if they're arrested for those acts. One of the really interesting things is there's a place called the Guttmacher Institute, which does research on reproductive health, reproductive justice, and they have a really nifty chart that lays out the sort of requirements for sex and HIV education, and Oregon is one of the few states that has an X in all the really positive boxes. But I found out recently that when I presented Queering Sex Ed to a conference last week, a lot of the students were looking at their state and they're going, who checks this? And I said, well, what do you mean? They're like, that's not what I got in my state. What I got was abstinence only that didn't have medically accurate information, even though my state's supposed to have medically accurate information. So even though we may on the books have these policies that say this is what you're supposed to get, I learned that a lot of people aren't getting those, and there's not really someone who follows up on that. So that was really troubling. So even when there's policy, it doesn't always get supported through culture, which leads into culture. That's the values, beliefs, and norms, family, faith, friends, all of their expectations of how you have sex, if you're allowed to have sex, what kind of sex you're allowed to have, what you're allowed to use, birth control, condoms. I mentioned working with Catholic populations and how I have to teach them how to do fertility-based awareness methods because they're not allowed to take hormonal birth control and they don't want to use condoms. So how much I want them to use condoms. So learning how to navigate that and how that can impact folks, because fertility-based awareness is not a very effective method by itself. So teaching them what tools they can and cannot use to be effective that doesn't contradict their faith. I've mentioned that y'all mentioned also that there's some cultures where condom use is considered very negative because it's a sign of mistrust between partners. Which kind of also touches base on physical environments, which is, are there health clinics? Are they accessible? Is there public transportation or some form of transportation to get people to health clinics so they don't have to walk in the rain or the snow or the heat? Are there safe houses and communities where people can walk if it's close enough? All these things contribute to good health, employment, so people can afford the health care that they need if there's not sliding scale clinics, if there are sliding scale clinics. All of that ties in to social status. I told you they were all interlinked, y'all. Income, social status, higher income tends to have better health outcomes. Higher socioeconomic status and education tends to have better health outcomes because they have access. That's the biggest part. They have access and they have knowledge to engage in these safer sex practices. Lower amounts of education can also be linked to lower self-esteem and lower feelings of value, so they may not value themselves enough to take care of themselves, which means not safe sex acts. Okay. And then individual behaviors, all of this could be set up to work for someone, and if they don't choose to engage in those safer sex acts, they're not going to have positive outcomes unless they're really lucky, and we know luck runs out. So individual behaviors includes choosing to use a condom, choosing to use birth control, choosing to abstain if they need to, choosing to get tested and treated. All of those things are included in individual behaviors. So, any questions so far?
I have a question, actually.
Yes.
Sorry. And I may be making assumptions, so I just want to clarify if I'm hearing that correctly. But in terms of determinants of health, thinking about all of those and individual behaviors, what I'm also hearing, I think, is that all of the other things then are impacting individual behavior. So being careful about that being only its own solo one
Right.
versus very much influenced or impacted by the others.
Yes. So they all tie in together. Any other questions? So, just to break up the text, those are my foundations in a nice little donut chart. And I have them all laid out equally because that's how it is to me, but it's also very fluid. So, these are different health education theories. I will try to give you the quick and dirty of them. The theoretical model, also known as the stages of change, has components of pre-contemplation, which is they're not thinking about changing a behavior. Contemplation, when they're going, I might could change this. This is something to think about. Preparation, they start taking steps to change a behavior. Action, they're changing the behavior. They've made the change. And then maintenance is if they continue making those healthy decisions or making the change decision versus relapse where they choose not to make that. So it's a circle that has a little offshoot. So what that means to me is I'm meeting people where they are. I can come into a class and have some people who've been getting tested every 6 months for years and someone who's like, why do I need to get tested? So I try to meet people where they are and help other people meet students where they are and also create spaces where everyone can benefit from that so that what I call my people who are in maintenance, they are not bored, and my people who are in pre-contemplation aren't feeling like it doesn't apply to them. I also use the health belief model, which focuses on perceived susceptibility, severity, benefits, and barriers. So what that means is how likely is it to affect them, how badly could it really affect them, how they benefit from changing their behavior or continuing their current behavior, and what barriers are preventing them from making those healthier decisions. And then the next piece is a cue to action, so what triggers them to start doing this? For example, someone who is diagnosed with diabetes might be triggered to start eating healthy because of the diabetes diagnosis within their family or within themselves. And then self-efficacy is the confidence someone has to do the new behaviors. So I include that as well because I understand there's a lot of barriers and there's a lot of play that kind of, to me, they all tie together, which is why I use 3 models, which I don't know if you're supposed to do, but it works for me. So then that kind of leads into the ecological model, which talks about all the ways that these people are affected. So the individual person, the interpersonal, which is sort of the advocacy and people who are near them in their space, institutional organization, which is where a lot of us are in this structure, and then community and policy. So all of those things impact students and folks. And so I like to consider all of those. We can't just focus on the one level. And then finally, this isn't a formal theory, but flexibility. That's one of my main foundations is I have to be flexible to do this work and to do it well. I can't be rigid in how I want to teach and how I want to communicate with folks. So I like to be flexible. And if I get to OSU and I find that none of these work here, I have a whole book of other health education theories I can call upon to adjust and meet our students where they are. Any question? Okay, that was kind of a theory lesson. Sorry if you weren't into the theory. So the impact of my approach. I don't know if right now what the way I approach things will impact our students. I hope it will, but I don't know for certain. So I'm going to talk to you about how I would like my approach to impact our students. I want to give students the motivation and the self-efficacy to engage in safer sex behaviors, whatever that looks like for them. I want to ensure they have access to services and products that help them make that change or maintain that. I want to foster a culture of consent and sex positivity. My sex positivity includes people who choose to abstain from sex for various reasons or who are asexual. I want to strengthen relationships with campus and community partners. And I would like to begin or continue a sex positive workshop series to help students explore the parts of sexuality outside STDs, pregnancy, and safer sex. Any questions? That went a lot faster this time than I timed myself.
Wonderful.
I like the part that you talked about having like workshops that talks about the pleasure of sex rather than always the like, be safe, be cautious, don't do this, sexual violence, or so it's normally a lot of times when sex is brought up, especially from a university, it's mainly talking about here goes some steps how to prevent or how to support those survivors or things like that. So it's good that you kind of have a goal of saying like, yeah, the enjoyment of sex talk.
Some of the workshops I've done and would like to do is sexuality and religion. We did one called 50 Shades of Knowles, which was about BDSM and the differences between BDSM and abuse, and kind of helped our students learned that, because that was right around the time Certain Movie came out.
Come on.
The anatomy of foreplay was a really fun one we did, where we looked at what foreplay could look like. So there's so many topics around sexual health that I want people to expand on and help them feel more comfortable in talking about sexuality in general.
Which leads to my question. How do you, how do you relate to different groups as far as when it comes to workshops and engaging students? Can you give us some examples of ways that you have with different groups that don't identify as yourself? And how you keep them engaged in learning more about this to be able to talk to their peers?
Feedback forms, if I worked, like I try to get general feedback forms, talking to people. If I walk in kind of cold to a presentation and I feel like people aren't feeling it, I adjust, and sometimes I'll just ask, hey, what are y'all not feeling? Are y'all just uncomfortable with the topic? Did I say something? So I'll just ask folks, like, the room feels a little off, what's going on? Sometimes I'm able to adjust on the fly. Some examples is I've worked with prison populations. You can't go in there and say vagina or vulva. They don't know what that is. There's a lot of other words they use, and you gotta use those words with them, even if you don't like some of those words. So adjusting your language. I use a lot of self-deprecating jokes about how cool I am. Like, I purposely use them wrong. And so if I find that people aren't laughing at that and that's making them feel some type of way, I change. And so I try to just adjust to fit the group by listening to them or reading them or just asking what they want me to do.
So maybe adding to Terrence's question, I'm wondering, so one thing you did earlier in your presentation was you sort of gave us an opportunity to interact with you. I'm wondering, I know it's a little bit off the cuff or off the fly, so you don't have to, but like, do you have an example of how, so those 3 workshops that you just talked about, like the sexuality and religion, or anatomy of foreplay, or BDSM, like, are there activity or like things that you would do to kind of engage the audience also to be able to gauge that interaction? Like, are there, I don't know if you have like examples or
I do
think of something?
So this presentation, even though it was kind of short, felt really weird to me because there was only one really interactive activity, but I also didn't want to let everyone know interactive. So with the anatomy of foreplay, we kind of focused on the 5 senses and how you break that down. So we had an activity with each sense. So we cut up flavored condoms and handed those out for taste. We talked about using candles. So we used a scented massage candle, and we had volunteers come up and we dripped on their hand and let them feel kind of that portion of it. With the 50 Shades of Knowles, so the BDSM one, we had members of the community come into our campus and they brought some pillows, and we let people like use some of their implements on pillows. Not on people, on pillows only. So I love interaction, and if people don't interact, I never want to be like, oh, come on, y'all. I'm just like, no? Okay, well, let's move on, because I don't want to coerce people into interacting, especially around these topics.
Thank you.
Yes.
It seems to me, you know, a lot of sex ed tends to be clinical, procedural, transactional. If you delved into the emotional, intimacy kind of aspects in a way that promotes healthy mindsets, that kind of type thing. Less technical and more internal, addressing the psyche of individuals and their response to sexual experiences.
I'm hearing her say she does both, right?
Yes.
Is that like you address the clinical, anatomical, logistical things, and some of these workshops then also address probably aspects that maybe historically aren't addressed if you're only doing a very clinical setting.
Right. So I do address the clinical, and sometimes in the workshops you get a little bit of both, but I think it's important to talk about the emotion that comes with sex, because it's not robots. We are not robots when we have sex. Well, that's not okay. Some people got a thing. So I do talk about, even in regular presentations, I talk about knowing your emotional state when you're having sex and knowing that. So they're both, and I think that's important to talk about both, because we're not just scientific beings, we're not just emotional beings, we're both. And so I think it's important to include both. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. So
moving to Oregon,
Yes.
it's very, and you're coming from the South, which again, sex is still something down there I don't really talk about. And coming to Oregon where it's not, again, another space that is not really talked about. What are some things that you have done at those other campuses that you talked about to kind of get students to become more open to talk about sex, to kind of move the program along, rather than getting stopped at just like, wow, we're talking about sex, right?
I do icebreakers. I'm very student Pharisee in that way. I love a good icebreaker.
Okay.
The fact that we haven't done one yet is no, I'm kidding.
It's a good entry point though.
And one that's really simple and allows the group as a whole to listen up is I usually have them shout out nicknames they know for parts. That's always a really good quick one because they can be really kind of anonymous with that. Sometimes I'll have them, there's quite a few text-in programs we can use as well. Sometimes I just have them say penis and vagina as loud as they can. Who here remembers playing the penis game in high school? I expand it because we include all parts here. So that just kind of large group engagement to loosen, and there's some people who won't talk, and that's okay because they're processors, they're internal processors, or they're shy. But I just try to do an icebreaker to get people comfortable. Sometimes I have these STD plushies that I buy myself whenever I reach a fitness goal. But I'll bring them into presentations and I'll like toss them. I'm like, this is the only time I'm telling you to pass the chlamydia. And they're just like so enamored by the fact that it's this little plushie that, so I bring that kind of stuff and just make it fun for folks.
I was just gonna ask if also if you, and maybe this ties in, I know in the interview we asked you a little bit of a question about the intersections of sexual health and sexual violence prevention and survivor advocacy and response, but I'm wondering about any experience you have or thoughts you have about being trauma informed around this work, and so perhaps, being mindful of folks in the room who have had varying experiences that might impact their engagement in talking about sexual health.
So being trauma informed is so ingrained in me, I forget that it's not the norm. So I'm very much about being trauma informed and very much about giving people permission to explore sexuality as they feel comfortable, and if they've had trauma, like talking about resources to cope with trauma and talking to people about how to talk to their partners about their trauma and how that can inform their sexuality. And also, like I've had a workshop where we talk to people about how to be supportive of your partner who's had trauma. Because a lot of people barely know how to navigate non-traumatized folks. So those are, I think, a very important part of this work.
Mary Beth, so how would you imagine your first 100 days on the job?
As much as I am going to hit the ground running, I'm going to hit the ground running by listening first. Because I don't want to come and say, okay, we're going to do all these things, and some of them are already being done, so I want to listen and see what other people are doing to make sure I'm not stepping on toes and also not recreating the wheel, because who has time for that? So my first 100 days probably wouldn't have a lot of action. It would be learning the culture of this campus, what what students want, probably if y'all going and sitting out at a table and talking to students and just learning the culture of the campus. If there's any ongoing programming, participating in that, learning sort of what is, like I said, the culture of the campus, what the students want, what the faculty and staff would like to see. So my first 100 days probably would not have a lot of action, it would probably have a lot of learning. Because I don't want to also come in and change things if they're already working, just because I think I have my ways better. That seems not a great way to make friends here.
I'm piggy off of that question. Granted that your first 30 days, you're getting the lay of the land. And you don't really want to program, or maybe you have some stuff that's thrown on your plate that you kind of have to program.
Of course, yes, yes.
But if you were to create or bring 2 or 3 things, what new initiatives, based on your research that you've seen of the institute, of this department and the institution, what are some things that you would like to bring to implement here?
So in some of my research, I saw that about 2 years ago, there was a really large gonorrhea outbreak in the area. I don't know if that's still ongoing according to the Oregon Times.
No, campus.
Okay, maybe
Gonorrhea on
probably
campus
here.
is about
Okay.
half of 1%.
Okay, so chlamydia is the bigger one.
Chlamydia
Okay.
There's a lot of syphilis research in the community. In fact, Benton County kind of lights up on a syphilis map. But again, from what I see in the lab here, it's not coming through student health. But chlamydia is definitely the big one for us.
So we've mentioned that chlamydia is the big one. I would find a way to do maybe a testing, like testing day, or incentives to get people to get tested. Maybe we partner with someone, get some, I always use Froyo as the example because I love Froyo. You know, Froyo and testing date. And like we set up a space for people to have like a date and get tested and then come get Froyo as an incentive for getting tested because they love free stuff. They'll get tested for free stuff. That's what I found when I bring HIV testing trucks. Like, what do I do to get to the shirt? I'm like, you get tested. They're like, oh, okay. I'll do it for the shirt. And I'm like, okay. So incentivize people to get tested outside of knowing their status is one of the things I would take on. Probably wouldn't delve into any of the workshops just yet because I would want to know what students cared about with that. Or if I did, I would say let's do a foreplay one because that's something that can apply to a lot of people. A lot of people are going to be interested in foreplay if they're interested in sex, or even if they're interested in parts of sex. So those are some programs that I would probably jump in doing, as well as just basic pregnancy and STI prevention because those are still important. And all of my presentations include consent conversations. So. Yes.
Piggybacking still on the first 100 days. I like that. So you talked about what you would do in your first 100 days, maybe some of the programs you might do. Who would you want to meet on campus? Not necessarily names, but like, what are the departments you would really want to get in connection with, or who are the groups on campus you would really like to connect to?
Student life, housing and residence life, Greek, athletics. Those are my first four, because those are going to be our largest groups. And then after that, commuter students, non-traditional students, students who aren't involved and who may be living on campus but who aren't involved in other groups. I like to go find, I've done a sexual health presentation with our board gamers group at West Georgia because they won't come to anything else, so I went to them and I played board games while we talked about sexual health. I did not win that one, that was upsetting, but they're using condoms, so I guess I did win. So just finding organizing, you know, those would be my first four main ones, but then finding other people, meeting as many as possible really, but those big four.
And are you thinking of like the cultural resource centers within student life? Is
Yes.
that- I just want to
That was
clarify.
my next question.
Yeah, right. I just wanted to make sure, I thought so. but-
Yeah, when you say student
When you
life.
say
like-
student
Yeah,
life,
Right, so
so
like,
we have
yeah,
our
so
student
like
life.
student government and the
Yes.
cultural
Break that
resource
down.
centers.
It's all-
Yes.
So I have a,
It's tough to get a lot in one answer.
Yeah.
Student life.
That was
no.
smart.
Just
That
one
was
answer.
smart.
so transitioning, right, from Georgia to Oregon. Talk a little bit about, I guess, so why'd you apply to this job, and then how would that transition be, as someone who did that great transition?
So one of the reasons I applied is I followed OSU through the Trojan Sexual Health Report Card for many years, and I've also heard a lot of really great things about Oregon, and just a lot of places and things in my life that pointed me toward Oregon, and I know, and we had a discussion earlier, that it's not this like liberal mecca, but there is a lot of more progressive things happening here, and especially with the election yesterday, Georgia feels like a losing battle, and it's stressful, and I want to come somewhere where my people are a little bit more. We'll find, is there a good sweet tea place around here?
No.
Put all that
Now.
stuff down there, a little more about the berries and nuts.
Oh, sweet.
Berries and nuts.
They don't know.
Or squirrels. I mean, I love
Mocha,
kombucha, but you're not squirrels.
Everything for the South.
Cleaner eating
Follow
pattern.
me.
I'll just make my own sweet tea, that's fine, just to check.
Yeah, you go.
So I'm gonna wrap our recording the interview piece, and then there's still a few more minutes, because I know we have a few more minutes, so if, unless people have other, like, more questions that I should, okay. I don't wanna stop the questions, okay, perfect. So yeah, please